Hi, I'm Hilary Agro. I'm a PhD student and anthropologist who works on drug use and drug policy. This video will go through some of the frequently asked questions and hesitations people have about drug legalization. What? So you want to just legalize all drugs? All of them? Even heroin and meth? Yeah, that's right. Especially heroin and meth, actually. Prohibition is the main reason why those drugs are unsafe in the first place, because they're not regulated for what's actually in them, the way that alcohol is. Every category of drug that exists has legitimate medicinal and recreational purposes, and can be used safely under the right conditions. Fentanyl, for example, is used for C-section births, and there's a prescription drug called disoxin, used for ADHD and sleep disorders. Guess what its sole ingredient is? Methamphetamine. Both of these drugs can be and are used safely by some people just for pleasure. Under the right conditions of poverty and trauma, certain drugs can be very addictive. But under different conditions, when a person has financial stability, community, and meaning in their lives, even the scary drugs can be used with no adverse consequences. No drug is inherently harmful just on its own. Everything depends on the context in which a drug is being used. But all people who use criminalized drugs are at risk of harm from social and medical stigma, discrimination, an unregulated supply, and police violence. But if we legalize drugs, won't it just be a free-for-all? Nothing will stop anyone from using drugs. Well, not much is really stopping people from using drugs right now. Drugs are purer and more available in more forms than ever right now, despite decades of government crackdowns in every conceivable way with every possible method. If prohibition is supposed to stop people from using drugs, and hint by the way, that's not actually its real purpose, we will get to that later, it's doing a terrible job. If we want people to stop using drugs that we consider problematic or addictive, then the best way to do that is to provide everyone with enough food, healthcare, stability, shelter, and importantly, community and meaning in their lives so that they don't have to turn to self-medication to deal with trauma and alienation. But moreover, let's unpack this a little bit. Why do we want to stop people from using drugs? Why should you or I get a say over what someone else puts inside their body and be able to have the state use physical violence to enforce that opinion? It's a very rare person these days, at least in Western society, who uses absolutely no drugs ever. Almost everyone uses something to relax or perk them up, at least once in a while, if not daily, like most of us. Whether it's a cup of black tea or coffee or a glass of wine. Humans have been using drugs for medicinal, spiritual, recreational, and social purposes for tens of thousands of years. Tobacco, cannabis, alcohol, mushrooms, even things like toad venom, and definitely a bunch of stuff that you've never heard of. Curiosity about consciousness alteration is as natural a human instinct as any that exists. Trying to stop people from experimenting with their consciousness or from trying to cure their pain is about as possible as stopping people from experimenting with flavor in cooking or trying different sexual positions. Humans like novelty. We like pleasure, and we don't like being in pain. That's just part of being human. Why do we want to control that instinct? And why do we think we can? Well, we're just not hitting the dealers hard enough or being tough enough with our borders. That's one approach we've been trying for a long time, but after a long time of trying, drugs are still currently available even in prisons, the most heavily guarded places on Earth. If we can't keep them out of prisons, realistically, how do we expect to keep them out of the rest of society? When alcohol was briefly illegal in the US, for example, people didn't stop drinking, but they did start drinking more concentrated, stronger drinks, like vodka and whiskey, instead of beer and wine, because it was easier to transport and sell without getting caught. So the same thing that happened in 1920s America is happening today in Canada, the US, and all around the world with opioids. Instead of drinking poppy tea or consuming opium, people only have access to what the people running the black market can sneak into the country. Fentanyl is easy to transport because it's so concentrated, but it's extremely tricky to dose for the same reason. So that's why there's a crisis with fentanyl happening right now because of prohibition. As police crack down, drugs only get stronger and more dangerous in response instead of going away. It happens like clockwork every single time prohibition is implemented anywhere. Well, don't we need to do more research first? Okay, so we need more research. Is a tactic used by conservative and incrementalist governments to delay and postpone change. Changes that they don't want, changes that they don't like, usually for ideological reasons. Our policies are generally not based in evidence and research. If they were, we wouldn't have drug prohibition. Take it from me, a researcher, the research is in. The problem is that people aren't actually listening to us researchers. They're not listening to us about which drugs, such as psilocybin mushrooms and GHB, are at least as safe as some of our already legal drugs like alcohol. And they're also not listening to us about the complex, devastating, and well-documented harms of prohibition, especially as it intersects with racism and capitalism. We may not know every single short and long-term side effect of every single drug, but we do know a lot about alcohol, and it turns out it's not good for you. It's pretty bad for you, but it's legal anyway, as it should be. And also, side note, you know what we definitely do know the short and long-term negative effects of? Prison. It is officially worse for both people and communities than any drug. Okay, fine. I think maybe marijuana should be legal, but not the harder stuff. Okay, I love this one. First, you should probably be careful about how you define harder drugs, because a lot of the definitions you might go to, harm to users, harm to the community, addictive potential, are going to implicate our cultural fave, alcohol. Sorry I keep bringing it up, but it's always relevant. Also, a question for you. Do you think that maybe getting people who are addicted to heroin medical treatment and therapy would work better than arresting them and putting them in jail? If the concern is that people are self-medicating from trauma with negative consequences because of how addictive their chosen medication is, then shouldn't we be addressing why there are so many people with traumas that need medicating in the first place? Under a legalized framework, addiction could be dealt with similarly to the way we deal with alcohol addiction now, as a health and social issue rather than a criminal one. Okay, all right. So maybe I'm on board with decriminalizing drug use so that users aren't punished. But drug dealers are profiting off of misery. They're exploitative, so selling should still be illegal. Okay, well, decriminalization is an important first step. So I'm so glad you're on board for that. But let's explore what would happen if we stopped punishing people for using drugs, but continued to punish people for selling them. So if we've already accepted that humans are gonna use drugs no matter what we do, then we're gonna get our drugs from somewhere. Without providing a legalized and regulated safe supply, like alcohol and tobacco users already have, people who use other drugs will still be left navigating a black market with a toxic, unregulated supply by default. People who need to use opioids and don't have access to a prescription have no way of knowing whether they're buying heroin or whether they're buying fentanyl or carfentanil or something worse, which is why overdoses keep happening. And as we've already discussed, they're not going to stop just because we make it harder for them to access the one thing that keeps their intense pain at bay. Decriminalization won't solve the problem of an unregulated supply. It will send fewer people to prison, which is good, but it will keep sending people to the morgue. Also, it's important to consider who is actually being punished under any system that uses criminal justice to deal with drugs at any level of the market. Remember when I mentioned that the actual function of drug prohibition is different from what most people think it is? Here's where we get into the really dark parts of drug policy, but they're really, really important. So most often, enforcement of the war on drugs is used as a convenient blanket excuse to harass, surveil, disrupt, and disenfranchise poor and racialized communities, especially Black communities in the US, as I think most of us are starting to be aware of, but in Canada too. If drug selling is a social given, but we continue to criminalize it, then police can continue to differentially enforce those laws with no effect other than the devastation of already marginalized and vulnerable communities. Having a set of laws that apply to pretty much everyone in a society makes it pretty easy to enforce selectively wherever the people in charge want a scapegoat, or to make sure certain communities are scattered, discriminated against, stigmatized, hunted, and unable to organize to fight for change. Furthermore, the drug market is global. It's about more than just us here as, a primarily consumer market in Canada. And in the Americas, the harms of the war on drugs are concentrated most acutely in Latin America due to violence between competing factions seeking to control the cocaine market. So trying to lower demand for cocaine is a battle long lost. Let's be real. People like coke. They're going to keep doing it. And decriminalization doesn't provide a new source for users to get their drugs. On the contrary, legalization and regulation would make it possible for local producers to offer different drugs to people looking for a cocaine type high without having to bring refined coca across the border at all. But even for cocaine, a legalized and regulated market could ensure, as long as it's done internationally, could ensure that farmers who produce coca are compensated fairly, the workers who transport and sell it could make fair unionized wages and pay taxes like anyone else, and business disputes could be solved through the legal system rather than via violence. You don't see beer companies sending hit squads at each other when they're competing for a contract. There's a reason for that. Now, this is obviously still a very complicated topic under international regimes of exploitative and extractive capitalism. So legalization would not solve everything in Latin America, but it would be a very good first step, an essential first step, as prohibition is at the heart of so much violence. There's a lot of other reasons that legalization rather than just decriminalization is the only way to go. A big one being a lot of the ways in which drug users keep themselves safe, such as using scales to measure their dose, or buying in bulk quantities to provide to their friend when they know they have a safe supply. Those things can get people arrested and charged for being dealers when a lot of them aren't traditionally dealers, or even the ones that are, they're just doing it to provide it to their friends and keep them safe. So we need to really reevaluate our understanding of who dealers are and what their role in the community is, because most people who use drugs have a really good relationship with their drug seller, and it's not as nearly as exploitative a job as most people like to portray it as for strategic reasons that we've already discussed. I don't know, all of this makes sense, I guess, but it just feels like such a huge change. I don't know if we're ready for that. Okay, look. I know that it sounds scary to change a deeply ingrained social system that we all grew up with and is the norm. But we've had a lot of very damaging and harmful systems in the past, such as slavery, feudalism, Jim Crow, residential schools, and it was uncomfortable for the majority back then to think about changing things too. But those systems had to go because they were harming people, and so does drug prohibition. It's easy for us to be talking about this in the abstract as a theoretical thing while we're safe in our homes, but meanwhile, human beings, real people, the actual people impacted by these policies and their families, those people are sitting in prison in Canada right now, as we're talking, torn away from their families for choosing to use a drug that the rest of us have deemed unacceptable. Oftentimes, they chose to use it because of severe traumas that they had that there was no treatment available for. And there are mothers in Mexico mourning their children right now because of our collective choice to allow illegal organizations to control the market for most drugs. There's just been so much death and violence that drug prohibition has caused, and we can hem and haw all day long, but the violence keeps going and will keep going until we get off our asses and decide to do something about it. Now, I'm also not saying that I have all the answers figured out already. This is just a distillation of all the arguments that researchers and, more importantly, activists and people who have been directly impacted by the war on drugs have been making for decades. There's a lot that could go wrong with legalization, and there's a lot that's going wrong with cannabis legalization right now. It's not perfect. And it's not a silver bullet for every problem related to drugs. Nobody knows exactly which approach to legalization will work for sure to address the current harms and repair the damage that's been done. But what we do know for sure is that prohibition is not working. It's just not. And the sooner we accept that, the sooner we can figure out what does work.